All the students to the video lecture on the topic Indradhanush Plan. This Indradhanush Plan was initiated in order to improve the performance of the public sector banks in India in the year 2015. Basically, the Indradhanush Plan means it is a 7 steps or 7-point plan program which has been initiated in the year 2015 for the improvement in the public sector banks. Basically, these public sector banks plays a very important role in the development of our economy. In this particular lecture, I am going to explain some basic components of Indradhanush Plan. So let us discuss what is Indradhanush Plan. This Indradhanush Plan was initiated in order to improve the performance and to bring a great change in the performance of public sector banks. This particular plan was announced on the day of independence, 15th of August 2015 by the then finance minister Arun Jaitley. This is 7 steps plan for the improvement of public sector banks. The public sector banks are those banks which are being controlled and owned by the government. The banks which are controlled and owned by the government, those banks are known as public sector banks. A 7 steps of improvement have been suggested in this Indradhanush Plan. Therefore, as we can see the 7 colors of Indradhanush, from that particular idea, the 7 steps and 7 different types of reforms have been initiated for the public sector banks. Therefore, this plan is known as Indradhanush Plan. It means, as we can see the 7 colors of Indradhanush, in the same way 7 steps of reforms have been initiated. Therefore, this plan is known as Indradhanush Plan. As I mentioned earlier in the initial part of my lecture, that public sector banks plays a very important role in the overall development of the economy. For priority sector lending, the public sector banks play important role. For infrastructural development and for other government projects, these public sector banks plays an important role, and therefore to initiate the reforms in this public sector banks is essential, and with that particular intention this Indradhanush Plan has been initiated. In this particular slide we can see the 7 different areas of reforms which have been suggested in the Indradhanush Plan. The first one is regarding appointments of officials. The second is related with the Bank Board Bureau. It is a watchdog of the performance of public sector bank. The third one is about the capitalization, means accumulation of the capital of the public sector banks through various ways. The fourth reform is regarding de-stressing. De-stressing means the public sector banks in the current situation are working under some complications. The particular important problem of the public sector complications is about non-performing assets. So, to overcome this particular stress and to come out of this particular stress, that is known as de-stressing of public sector, is the fourth area of reform. The fifth one is empowerment. Empowerment of the banks without the interference of the government in the operations of the bank. And the Sixth step of reform is about framework of accountability. It is the initiation of the new criteria for increasing the performance of the banks. And the last area of reform is about the governance reforms. Means reforms it at the government level and no interference policy of the government in the banking sector. So these are the 7 areas where the government of India initiated reforms in various ways for the improvement of the public sector banks. Now step by step we will discuss each and every point in detail. The very first point is about the appointment of officials. As per the Indradhanush Plan, they separated the posts of chairman and managing director because the chairman represents the interests of the shareholders of the bank, and at the other side, manager director, that is MD, is responsible for the functioning of the bank. Therefore, in order to avoid the influence of the shareholders on the bank, it is required to take a step in this concern. So therefore, these two posts, chairman and managing director of the public sector bank, they have been splitted, they have been separated from one another. And the another initiative taken in this case is about the private sector candidates allowed in the public sector banks to apply for the position of managing director and to apply for the position of chief executive officer in these banks. This is the important initiative taken by the government through Indradhanush Plan regarding the appointments of the officials of public sector banks. The next second reform is about the Bank Board Bureau. This Bank Board Bureau, the government of India, it gives all the responsibilities as owner of public sector banks to this Bank Board Bureau. The important responsibility of the Bank Board Bureau is to perform functions of appointment at the senior level in public sector banks. It is the responsibility of the Bank Board Bureau to make the appointment of the senior officials of the public sector bank. And the second important responsibility assigned to this Bank Board Bureau is to perform as a watchdog of the public sector banks. The Bank Board Bureau was headed by the structure of the Bank Board Bureau. I will explain in brief. While discussing the structure of the Bank Board Bureau, this Bank Board Bureau is headed by the Governor of Reserve Bank of India. It will also comprises of one chairman and 6 members. Out of these 6 members, 3 officials and 3 are experts. Out of these 6 members, 3 officials is required to appoint as the member and 3 experts is required to appoint as the member. And out of these 3 experts, minimum 2 experts, they should be from the experts of the banking sector. So this is what the second reform initiated in this particular plan. Now the third reform is about capitalization. The capitalization, it has been suggested in this particular plan to provide adequate capital to all the public sector banks in order to keep a safe buffer in order to keep a safe amount of capital with the public sector bank. And this amount should fulfill the minimum norms of Basel III norms. And in this case, up to 2019, around 1,80,000 crore rupees are required for the fulfillment of adequate capital of public sector banks. Out of this 1,88,000, government take initiative to provide 70,000 crore rupees to the public sector bank, and remaining 1,10,000 crore rupees is expected to raise by these public sector banks through various managerial reforms, tight non-performing assets management, improvement in its operations and functioning of the bank. Through these various measures, it is expected to raise 1,10,000 crore rupees by the banks. The government helped initially to raise the capital up to 70 crore rupees. This is the third step of Indradhanush Plan, third reform of the Indradhanush Plan. The fourth one is related with the de-stressing. De-stressing means to lessen the stress which have been laid down on the public sector banks, to reduce the stress of the public sector banks. Which type of stress and in what type of stress the public sector banks are working in the current situation? That is, the non-performing assets of the public sector banks are increasing because many projects are still pending due to the delays in the approval of the government, of the various departments of the government. In order to overcome this particular problem of non-performing assets, what is done? A project monitoring group has been constituted, established in order to overcome this problem, overcome this stress of public sector bank. And government made an arrangement to make available the necessary requirements for the delayed projects. Particularly, the projects which have been delayed, they are related with the infrastructural projects. And government also adopted a flexible policy in restructuring of the existing loans by the banks under the policy of de-stressing. So this is the fourth plan, fourth type of reform which is implemented in Indradhanush Plan. The fifth one is about the empowerment of the banks. Empowerment in this particular reform, the government interference is not expected. The public sector banks are encouraged to take their own decisions independently, keeping the commercial interest of the organization in mind. As per the commercial view, the government has decided to perform the public sector banks independently without any interference in the policy decisions of the banks. The second step in this empowerment is about the redressal. The step of grievance redressal mechanism for customers and redressal mechanism for the staff also. And this empowerment also given a greater flexibility to the banks for hiring or for appointing various officials who are working in the public sector banks. This is the fifth initiative, and the sixth is about the framework and accountability of the banks. In order to measure the accountability of public sector banks, the earlier system which was existed, it depends upon the statement of intent. Means in earlier system they used to measure the performance of the banks on the basis of its statement of intent. Statement of intent means the plan of the public sector bank which they have sketched down, and at what extent these public sector banks achieved that plan in that particular year. It is measured under this statement of intent, SOI. The finalization, it means the targets of banks used to be finalized only at the end of the financial year. This was the earlier system. Now, in the Indradhanush Plan, under the reforms of the framework and accountability, a new system of key performance indicators was initiated. What is this key performance indicators? Under the key performance indicators, two criteria have been decided. The first criteria is about quantitative criteria and second one is about the qualitative criteria. 80 marks have been allotted to this quantitative method criteria and 20 marks allotted to qualitative criteria, and the sum of these two criteria is equals to 100 marks. Under the quantitative criteria, the first measurement is about the efficiency of capital use. How the public sector banks utilizes their capital. How efficiently they do utilize their capital, and 25 marks allotted to this particular thing. And the second criteria about diversification of business. How the public sector banks do provide various types of products to their customers. How they are diversifying their business. How they are giving different types of services to their customers. This is what 25 marks allotted to this particular point. And the third one is how these public sector banks are managing their non-performing assets. At what extent they are managing this NPA very efficiently, and 15 marks have been allotted to this particular point. And at last, in this qualitative criteria, financial inclusion have been allotted 15 marks. What steps have been taken by the public sector bank in order to expand the banks, in order to expand the banking services to the general public? At what extent they have reached to the doorsteps of the people? How they are providing the banking services to the unbanked people? What they have done in this particular case, this is measured in this qualitative criteria, and 15 marks allotted to this. And in qualitative criteria, for the 20 marks, the strategic initiatives to the improvement of human resource quality. What the public sector banks are doing for improving the quality of the human resources who are working in the banks. The next point is HR initiatives. The human resources who are working in public sector banks, what initiatives they have been taken. It is also measured under qualitative criteria. And improvement in extending the credit rating, it is also considered for assigning the key performance indicators. So these are the key performance indicator for measuring the framework of accountability of the banks who are working in the public sector. This is the sixth reform under Indradhanush Plan, and the last one is governance reforms. The process of this governance reform started with Gyan Sangam. Gyan Sangam means the discussion of the higher officials regarding the performance of the public sector bank. This Gyan Sangam is a meeting, a type of meeting where the discussion is conducted of the higher officials of these banks. And through these discussions, the steps have been taken for improving the efficiency, the profitability of these public sector banks. A private meeting of public sector banks is used to conduct to discuss regarding the optimization of the capital, increasing the digitalization process of the banking services, strengthening the branches of the banks, diversification of the risk and risk management, improving the managerial performance of the banks, and regarding the financial inclusion, it is necessary to conduct the discussions of the bank officials. And under these governance reforms, the discussions and organization of meeting is essential. And it is expected to conduct these meetings, to conduct these discussions, and to implement all above 6 steps to through these discussions of the higher officials. This is what expected in the governance reforms. This is what I explained, the Indradhanush plan for the revamp, means for the improvement of the public sector banks. In this lecture, I stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much.